at this story further and bring in a director from Article 19, Henry Maina. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
You come from an organization that campaigns for media freedom. What are your thoughts on the bill?
My quick thoughts when I listened to what Parliament was doing is that we are going to the pre-1998 days when there wasn't a clear law to safeguard media freedom in the country, and state operatives had a free hand to do what they wanted. And that even where we had the 1998 Act with the Section 88 that was used to raid the Standard Group, we seem to have reintroduced that through a back door, because it is creating a body that, one, in my opinion, is unconstitutional, because the body that is supposed to be created for licensing is not expected to do any other work apart from just purely managing frequency spectrum. But the media practitioners had proposed an entrenchment of the self-regulatory process, which had been on for years and had been perfected. Most people in their consultations with Parliament clearly pointed out what ought to be done.
I'll actually bring you back to that, but essentially, yes, what is the Kenyan media looking at from now on?
I think it's a dark time that individual journalists would be suspended, would be removed from a role of register for an ethical breach as opposed to a crime. And if that happened, yes, you might be entitled to appeal through a high court, but that's a lengthy and expensive process. But two, that media houses would be slammed by a fine of 20 million or 0.2% of their gross turnover, meaning that some media houses would be wound up. Immediately, one case goes through that tribunal, some organizations would not be able to remain in circulation because this body is expected to follow other processes to ensure that whatever fines they make are duly paid immediately an appeal is exhausted.
Maina, let me be the devil's advocate here. Is it that the Kenyan media isn't able to control itself, to regulate itself, that the government now has to come in from where you sit?
I think the reverse is true, that the Kenyan government has too many skeletons in its cupboard, and it has seen that media organizations are prying into it, and here it is struggling to be able to say we don't have a cupboard, leave alone one that has skeletons. So we need to be able to come back to our senses and understand that the government is not the guarantor of freedom of the press, that individuals and media houses, once licensed, are entitled to that. And the government ought to only put up mechanisms and structures that would facilitate that as opposed to restrict it. What we are seeing today, I think, is a sad thing, because I told people that Kenya today was parading itself in London under the Open Government Partnership as one of the most open governments, among only 6 in Africa that are part of the Open Government Partnership. On the other hand, in Nairobi, we had few MPs beginning to say they would not want journalists to do their work.
Is this the beginning of gagging then?
It is already. To understand that we still keep criminal defamation in our statute books, we still keep so many other laws that are not as progressive. To add on this one is just an extra challenge that journalists have to go through. Publication of false news is still a crime in our law book. So if we do not have an access to information law, you do your investigation to get information, they would still charge you with this. And a breach of 1 million, how many journalists have an extra million to pay? Or media houses have an extra 20 million to pay. And this is going to be made harder with the understanding that once the bill is signed into law, all media houses, radio and TV, would be expected to have a 60% local content airing. So you begin to understand that the turnover, for you to be able to do productions that would make 60%, if today KTN had 45% of their airtime taken by advertisements, it means immediately this law is signed, you will breach all those contracts that you are holding.
Finally, Maina, before I let you go, what then are the dangers of having a media that is not free in a country like Kenya?
One, the whole promise of Vision 2030 is going to be muted. our Vision 2030 is built on a pillar of openness, on a pillar of allowing citizens to directly engage in governance and in government affairs. If that is not going to be permitted, then there is a whole mirage that the promise of development was a dream that Kenya would never attain, because access to information, media freedom are fundamental to any developmental process. We need to be able to understand that, and we need to remind our MPs that yes, legislation is their core role. We don't want to carry that out of them, but they must do it with clear understanding and responsibility too.
Okay.